Okay, here we go. This is the music from the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. What does that have to do with Danny? Listen to that music. When we were little kids, we went to the Boulevard Theater. Yeah, maybe I can get away with this. Let me stop it. We went to the Boulevard when we lived in Barncastle. Danny was older, my older brother. And we went to the movies. Way back when, kids can go to the movies by themselves. And parents didn't think of anything bad. Nowadays it's all horrible and perverts and the whole shit. But way back in the 50s, we lived in Barncastle in Los Angeles. We called it, okay, the lady that owned the house, their name was Barncastle. And they had this big warehouse in the back, and we lived in the front big house. So we lived in the castle, and in the back was the barn. So it was Barncastle. So then me and Danny went to the movies, and we saw the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. It was fantastic. To this day, there's never been another movie that has kicked my ass as much as Ray Harryhausen's Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. It was wonderful. For little kids, I think I just had started kindergarten, to see dragons and cyclops and skeletons fighting and the beautiful princess and the genie and the lamp and the wizard and the whole thing. It kicked our butts for the rest of our lives. I love Ray Harryhausen. And Danny loved that movie too. So Danny, my brother Danny. Danny had asthma. So my parents, when we were in New York, when I was a tiny kid, Danny went to the doctor a whole bunch of times. And they gave him so many drugs that my parents were all freaked out that Danny's brain had been burned out from all the drugs and stuff. So they let Danny get away with murder. But who was our older brother? There was Frank, me, and Danny. And Francis was getting married at the time. And Stanley lived in New York. So Danny. Danny was my older brother. I would follow Danny around all the time, because I wanted to be with Danny. And Danny, since he was an older kid, didn't want me around. Maybe some when I was a little kid. I followed Danny to the, when we lived in the projects in Culver City across the street, when they were making the elementary school. I wouldn't have gone there by myself, but I went with Danny because Danny was my older brother, so I followed him. And we made that big mess, and there's a video that I talk about that. And we got whipped on the way home, Danny and me. My dad said, take off your pants, and boom, 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 with the belt, Danny and me. Okay, let's see what else. I followed Danny. Danny used to go down to the creek, we called it, but it was the LA River that went out to Santa Monica. We lived in Culver City. So the creek went from downtown LA all the way through town and went through Culver City, and we went down in there. And Danny would say, roll your pants all the way up to as high as you can get it. Roll your pants way up, take off your shoes and socks and and then wade across. That was a nasty place. I'm sure there was busted bottles and all kinds of nasty shit. And if we would have stepped on, we would have gotten tetanus or some shit. But no, we went across, rolled our pants all the way up and waded across and got to the other side. And there was lots of frogs. And there was this one little stupid, fat, ugly Mexican kid that was pulling the legs off of frogs. Ah! How could you do that? He said, hey, look at this. And he'd rip a frog's leg off. Oh! So Danny, my brother. Danny went to Sun Air Foundation in Tahunga because he had asthma. and the doctors from the California hospital that we used to go to when we were little kids. Mom would put us on the bus. We'd all go on the bus from Culver City straight to downtown. And I mean, me and Frank had, a cold, this and that, and the doctors would like, here are lungs and take, blood pressure. But Danny was the one. I remember he got shots, like a whole row of 2 shots, and the doctor with a ballpoint pen would circle the the injection sites because they were all different allergens to see which one Danny was allergic to. But Danny went to the Sun Air Foundation, and he was there. I don't know if it was a year or 6 months, but it was a long time. Danny was there a long. When you're a little kid, it's like forever. So we used to go visit Danny up there in Tujunga. And I remember one time, Leave It to Beaver kid came, and he for some function, some family thing. And then we looked at him and said, "Oh God, that doesn't look like him," because he had a bunch of freckles. So they would, put tons of makeup, and you can see the freckles. Let's see what else. What else? What else? Danny was always away with his friends, finding girlfriends and all kinds of stuff. And I had to stay home. Frank was smaller, so he didn't do anything. So I had to help my dad when we were the managers of that apartment complex. I was always helping Dad. Danny was gone with Bobby Solis. That was his best friend from elementary school. And then they went to Jackson. They went to Virgil, but they got kicked out of Virgil because it was a time when the principal was kicking out everybody, and Danny and Bobby happened to look like the bad guys, so they got kicked out to Jackson. Jackson was a fucked up school where criminals went to. Danny wasn't a criminal, and Bobby Solis wasn't either. But then Danny went to Jackson, okay. And I went to Virgil and everything, but Danny and Bobby would come after school all the time. They must have got out earlier. So, they were around a lot. So then, okay, as time went on, Danny wanted a motorcycle. Vroom. So Dad bought Danny a Honda 50. It was a small motorcycle. And at the time, we knew Rodney. And then they got a job at Orbax, I think, in downtown LA. So then they would both go on. Danny would drive the motorcycle, and Rodney would be on the back. So then one morning they're going to work, and instead of Danny passing the car on the left side, Danny decided to pass the car on the right side. Oh, lifelong mistake. They hit a car that was parked out there. They hit the corner of the car. Danny lost this much of that finger, I don't know, a quarter of an inch. Busted his lower leg. Rodney was on the back. Rodney busted his femur because they crashed into the corner of the car that was parked. So then forever, both of them walked with limps. Danny walked with worse of a limp because Rodney had a pin in his leg, and because his father had good insurance from the Universal, I don't know, motion picture, whatever it was. And Danny's motorcycle was busted, and that's when Peggy and Stanley came. I don't know if it was the first time or the second time. And I remember Danny and Rodney were in the hospital, and we had to go and get the motorcycle that was in some kind of impound. And we took it home and stuff and parked it in the yard. And that's when Valerie and Bobby had gotten married, and I took them after the wedding all the way to the East LA General Hospital to visit Danny and Rodney. And Bobby was dressed in his tuxedo and Valerie in her big old white dress, and they went to the room, and I drove them, and they visited with them in a few minutes. We didn't stay that long, and everyone was, "Oh wow, how great that you came." Yeah, it was great. And then we went back to the party and all that stuff. Let me see. Danny hooked up. At that time, Danny was with Sharon. And from Sharon came Brandy. Brandy's Danny's daughter from Sharon. Okay? Sharon had Kimmy and Jerry. Danny said one time Jerry was Chucky, that nasty horror movie Chucky. Yeah, Jerry was a bad kid, but this is about Danny. Okay, Danny was with Sharon for a number of years. Danny worked at Akron, which was like a Pier 1 before there was a Pier 1. And he worked for Sweda cash registers. He would go and repair cash registers at different stores, and a lot of McDonald's had Sweda cash registers. And Danny said he'd come with the spray bottle of DW-40 and just take the cash register outside because the oil and grease in the air would get into the cash register and it gunk it up and it wouldn't work anymore. So Danny would get the DW-40 outside and just shh a whole bunch, and then the cash register worked, and he'd take it inside, and everyone thought Danny was doing magic, but it was just cleaning. He worked there for a number of years, and then he worked for, I don't know the name of the company, but they made wheelchairs and hospital equipment like the beds and gurneys and all kinds of stuff. And Danny said that old men would come wheeling themselves from Long Beach because their wheelchair was busted somehow and they couldn't get it fixed, so they would take days. Danny said these old guys were bums and they would take forever, weeks to wheel themselves slowly all the way. It was at Santa Monica. And Danny worked there. I think Danny worked a forklift there because he had experience with forklifts from Akron. And then Danny got a job with Bobby Solis. Bobby Solis worked in the print department of Paramount Pictures. So then Danny got a job in the copy area, working a copy machine, and Paramount was so cheap that they wouldn't buy extra books for a movie they were making. They would send the book down to the copy department and have Danny copy the whole book. And sometimes it was like, 10 copies to get to all the different people that were making the movie, so they had a copy of it. And Danny did that for a number of years. I used to go and get him at work. I'd go and park outside there, and he'd come out, and I'd take him home. But Danny had a big mouth, just like I do, just like Dad did, a big temper. So one day some producer or something said, and it was quitting time, 4 o'clock to go home, 4:30. And they called down to Danny, hey, we need a copy of this book. And Danny yelled at them and said, well, I'm not doing that for you. It's quitting time, and we make the money for you and this and that. So, just like the mafia did years ago, they didn't do anything. They just put it in the back of their mind, and within a month or two, Danny was fired. Danny got fired from Paramount Studios. And Danny had this great personality, and girls and women loved Danny. So all the secretaries that Danny had contact with said, can you do something for Danny? Don't fire him, do this and that. And they fired him. They didn't give a damn. So then, for years, Danny didn't have to work. I remember when Danny was dying, a few years before he died. A few days before he died. I called him up because he lived in San Diego. And I told him, hey, you're dying. Okay, you're the first one of us that's dying, because Stanley, Francis, me, and Frank were still alive. But Danny was dying. And I told him, hey, don't be afraid. You've had a great life. You had tons of time when you didn't work. You didn't have a job, but people took care of you. And you didn't have to worry about money. And it's true. Danny never worried about money. So Danny left Sharon and went with Kathy. Kathy was a French Canadian bitch that hated me. I don't know why. But I would go visit Danny at Kathy's house. And Kathy was always pissed at me for some shit. Okay, one time we had a garage sale. And I sold everything except a bike that Danny had given me years before. And as soon as I'm leaving and I'm saying, okay, I'm going, Kathy sticks her head out the window. Well, don't you leave all your shit here that you didn't sell. And I told her, hey, I sold everything except that bike of Danny's. He had given it to me, and that's the only thing. And then she had to shut her mouth up. I had taken some pictures, and I used to take pictures inside Danny's house all the time because Danny had all kinds of cool stuff. And one time she got pissed that there was a pile of clean clothes I took a picture of. And she didn't like it, and she yelled at me, oh, it's okay, Kathy. I don't know where you are right now, but I don't care. So, Danny left Kathy and came to my house a couple of times. I gave him a key. But then Danny ended up going to San Diego. And Aurelio gave Danny a chance to live in Aurelio's shop because Aurelio was a typewriter guy. I've said this before. And he had a shop in San Diego, I think the last shop that he had. And he told Danny, okay, there's a bathroom, there's a toilet, a sink. Stay here, find a job, do whatever you can to get yourself together. So Danny was there for I don't know how long. But then Aurelio came one day, and the lights were all on. And Danny hadn't been there for days. So Aurelio got pissed because Aurelio didn't have all kinds of money to pay for electricity. And he was pissed that Danny had left the lights on. So Aurelio kicked Danny out. So then Danny was a bum in San Diego. And Danny always wanted to kind of be a bum. You know, Danny liked to be a pirate and a bum and whatever. So he was living in a garage somehow. And he met Mary, who was a bum also. So they got together and they liked each other and they got an apartment. And Danny didn't work. So it was Mary taking care of everything. And, you know, Danny was cool with that. Mary was a caretaker for invalids, and she got a job taking care of this older man. He was like in his 30s or 40s, but he was retarded, and they had bought a van for him, so he'd sit up in the front seat with a little kid, like steering wheel and a beep 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 little horn for himself. And I visited them. Well, I went to San Diego and stayed with Danny for a day, and then I went to Francis' house. But Mary was very nice, and Mary was there until Danny died. Because then Danny, I don't know, the cancer in his lung and his legs all spread and all kinds of stuff. Because Danny smoked cigarettes since he was a little kid. So, he lived in San Diego. He had stayed at Francis' house for a while, but they kicked him out because he was an ass. Because Danny was an ass, you know. And Danny went to jail and with Lelo and Tijuana there and Rosarito, and those jails over there are horrible. So, okay, what else? So Danny died of cancer living in San Diego. I didn't go to the funeral, but a couple of weeks before, Mom and, I don't know, Dad and Francis and Lelo all went to Danny's house where he was living, and he said, well, make me some rice and beans and bacalao frito. But Danny was so sick he couldn't eat anything, so they were all there with him. And I had talked to him, you know, a day or two before he was dying. But Danny was my brother, my older brother. And we saw the 7 Voyage of Sinbad when we were kids. It was fantastic. And forever, we would always talk about that. I used to go visit Danny when he lived on Manzanita in the back house when my parents moved out and he moved in there. And Danny had his little room with all the stuff in it. I used to go visit Danny all the time. That's where I had my dark room in the back in the garage. I had a great time with Danny. I used to live there. And Danny was my best friend for many, many years. And we hung out together for a long time on Manzanita. I would come late at night. A lot of times, and I'd see the light on, and I'd knock on the window, and Bobby would be there talking with Danny, and I came in. We had a great old time. Great old time. So my older brother, Danny. What else can I say? Danny used to beat me up when I was a kid, but when we grew older, I loved my brother. We hung out together a lot. So I miss my brother all the time. I miss Danny. I miss Mom and Dad and Aurelio and Bobby and all those people. But Danny most of all. Okay? All right. That's it. My brother. Danny.